First story, The Whispering Pines by Sarah Mitchell. It was a crisp autumn evening when I decided to go camping alone in the Adirondack Mountains of New York. The leaves were turning various shades of red and orange, and the thought of spending a night in the wilderness under a starry sky seemed idyllic. I had chosen a secluded spot deep within the forest, far away from any established campgrounds, seeking solitude and peace. As I set up my tent near a pristine, crystal-clear lake, the fading sun cast eerie shadows through the dense pine trees. There was an uncanny silence in the woods, broken only by the occasional rustling of leaves in the wind. But what unsettled me most was the pungent scent of pine sap in the air, almost overpowering. Nightfall came swiftly, and I settled down in my tent, the soft glow of a lantern casting a warm ambience. I was reading a novel by flashlight when I first heard it, a faint, distant whisper that seemed to emanate from the dark woods. I strained to make out the words, but it was unintelligible, like a secret shared among the trees. Anxiety welled up inside me as I turned off the lantern, leaving only the moonlight to fill the tent. The whispers grew closer, their tones shifting from incomprehensible to sinister. I couldn't help but think that someone might be out there, lurking in the shadows. My heartbeat quickened, and I clutched my pocket knife, my only form of protection. I wondered if this might be the work of local hooligans, attempting to scare off campers. But as the whispers continued, they took on a haunting, otherworldly quality, like the forest itself was speaking in a language I couldn't comprehend. The night seemed to stretch on endlessly, and my paranoia reached its peak when I heard something that sent a shiver down my spine, a twig snapping not far from my tent. I strained my ears, trying to discern any movement, any sign that I wasn't alone. As if in response to my fear, the whispers began to crescendo, their intensity almost unbearable. The words, if they were words, began to form a chant, like an incantation from a forgotten religion. I couldn't take it any longer, and with my heart pounding in my chest, I unzipped the tent and stepped outside. The scene that greeted me was surreal. The pines were alive with movement, their branches swaying in unison as though conducting some dark ceremony. The whispers emanated from the trees themselves, their origin impossible to pinpoint. It was as though the forest had come to life, and I was an intruder in a sacred ritual. Terrified, I grabbed my backpack and fled from the campsite, not daring to look back. I ran through the woods, my footsteps echoing in the silent night. The whispers faded into the distance, and as I reached the safety of a nearby trailhead, the spell seemed to break. I spent the rest of the night in my car, parked at the trailhead, too shaken to return to the campsite. The whispers haunted me for weeks, leaving me with a profound sense of dread and the unsettling belief that the ancient pines held secrets that were not meant for human ears. Second story, The Lake Cabin by John Anderson. Nestled on the shores of Lake Winnipesaukee in New Hampshire, my uncle's cabin was a rustic, tranquil getaway. It was the ideal place for me to escape the stresses of everyday life. However, what happened one summer weekend there would forever change the way I felt about the place. I arrived at the cabin on a Friday evening, eager to spend a couple of peaceful days alone. The only neighbors were miles away, and I planned to take full advantage of the serenity. After unpacking and settling in, I took a leisurely walk around the property, taking in the breathtaking views of the lake and surrounding forest. That night, I sat on the cabin's porch, listening to the symphony of nature, crickets chirping, owls hooting, and the gentle lapping of the lake against the shore. As I read a book by the dim light of an antique lantern, a sense of contentment washed over me. However, as the night grew darker, I began to hear strange sounds coming from the lake. At first, I thought it might be the wind rustling the trees, but it quickly became apparent that the noises were irregular, almost like whispers. I strained to listen, and it seemed as though the whispers were coming closer. I felt a sudden chill, a shiver running down my spine as the whispers intensified. They were hauntingly close, yet I couldn't decipher a word. The night air became thick with unease, and I considered returning to the cabin for safety. But curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to investigate. I grabbed a flashlight and followed the sound to the lakeshore, its dark waters mirroring the starry night. The whispers seemed to be originating from the lake itself. My heart pounded as I shone the flashlight over the water, revealing ripples on the surface as if someone, or something, was lurking beneath. My mind raced, thinking of tales of underwater creatures or restless spirits. I was about to retreat when a hand, pale and translucent, reached up from the water, its fingers brushing the surface. I stumbled backward in terror, dropping the flashlight, plunging the lakeshore into darkness. Scrambling to my feet, I raced back to the cabin, my heart pounding, and locked the door behind me. I dared not look out the window, fearing what I might see. The whispers continued, growing fainter as the night wore on. Morning light revealed nothing amiss, and I cautiously approached the lake once more, half expecting to find no trace of the previous night's events. But what I did find was a single, wet footprint on the wooden deck leading to the water, as though someone, or something, had stood there. I never spent another night at the cabin, the whispers haunting my memories. To this day, I can't explain the eerie presence in the water, and the sense of unease that washed over me whenever I returned to Lake Winnipesaukee. Third story, The Desolate Trail by Emma Parker. My passion for hiking had taken me to many remote places, but nothing could prepare me for the desolation I encountered while hiking the Appalachian Trail in the deep wilderness of western North Carolina. It was an eerie, yet enchanting journey into the unknown. The autumn foliage was in full splendor as I set off on my solo hike along a less traveled section of the trail. With only my backpack and the company of my own thoughts, I embraced the solitude. The dense canopy overhead filtered the sunlight, casting long shadows on the forest floor. As I continued my hike, I noticed a strange feeling that something was off. The air was unusually still, and the rustling of leaves was absent. The birds, too, were eerily silent. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I walked deeper into the woods, my steps echoing loudly in the silence. The deeper I ventured, the more the sense of being watched gnawed at me. The solitude I had initially cherished now felt like an oppressive weight on my shoulders. And then I heard it, a low, distant hum that sent shivers down my spine. It was a guttural, unsettling sound, unlike anything I'd ever heard in nature. It vibrated through the trees and seemed to come from all directions at once. Nervously, I quickened my pace, hoping to escape the oppressive atmosphere. But the hum grew louder and closer, its origin impossible to pinpoint. Panic began to take hold of me as I stumbled upon a clearing, and there, I saw a group of people standing in a circle. They were dressed in tattered, mismatched clothes, their faces concealed by masks made of animal skulls. In the center of the circle was a large, unrecognizable object covered in a dark, sticky substance. It seemed like an altar of some kind, and the eerie humming emanated from it. Frozen in terror, I watched as one of the figures raised a knife high above their head and brought it down onto the object. The moment the blade touched the surface, a deafening screech filled the air, and the forest itself seemed to come alive with movement. The leaves rustled, and unseen forces seemed to push against me. I turned and fled in a blind panic, my heart pounding, and the disturbing hum still echoing in my ears. I didn't stop running until I reached the nearest town and found help. To this day, I can't explain what I witnessed on that desolate section of the Appalachian Trail, but the memory of that eerie ritual still haunts me, and I can't shake the feeling that I had stumbled upon something ancient and sinister, hidden in the heart of the forest. Fourth story, The Abandoned Shack by Michael Williams. I had always been an adventurous soul, seeking solitude and thrill in the great outdoors. One summer, I decided to venture into the rugged wilderness of the Pacific Northwest. My goal was to explore an off-the-beaten-path area in the Olympic National Park, deep in the forests of Washington state. I set off on my solo journey, carrying a backpack filled with supplies and my trusty camping gear. The day was bright and the trail promising, but as I delved deeper into the forest, an eerie sense of isolation settled in. The towering trees loomed above, and the canopy was so dense that it blocked out much of the sunlight, casting a gloomy pallor over the surroundings. As evening approached, I came upon an overgrown trail, nearly hidden by the underbrush. My curiosity got the best of me, and I decided to follow it, thinking it might lead to a hidden gem. The path became progressively more challenging to navigate, and it was clear that it hadn't seen human traffic in a long time. Just as I was about to turn back, I stumbled upon an old, decrepit shack hidden in a small clearing. The sight of the abandoned structure sent a shiver down my spine. It was like something out of a horror movie, with moss-covered walls and a roof that had nearly caved in. It appeared to have been abandoned for decades. Despite my unease, I couldn't resist exploring further. I pushed the creaky door open and entered the shack, and the smell of decay and dampness assaulted my senses. Inside, I found a room littered with tattered, moldy books and remnants of a long-forgotten life. There was a weathered journal on a wooden table, and out of curiosity, I began to read. The entries were cryptic and disturbing, describing the author's growing obsession with the woods and the belief that a malevolent force resided deep within the forest. They wrote of whispers in the wind and eerie, disembodied voices calling their name. It seemed that the author had become increasingly unhinged, convinced that they were being watched and followed. As I read the final entry, a chilling feeling washed over me. It described a decision to venture deeper into the forest, seeking out the source of the whispers. The author believed they had to confront the malevolent force once and for all, and the journal ended abruptly. Suddenly I heard it, the soft, faint sound of whispers coming from outside the shack. It was as if the very forest itself was speaking, and the voices grew closer and more insistent. Panic welled up inside me, and I made a hasty retreat from the shack, slamming the door behind me. Outside, the whispers continued, surrounding me from all directions. I couldn't discern any words, but the overwhelming sense of being watched and pursued was undeniable. The forest seemed to come alive with movement, as though I had awakened something ancient and malevolent. I ran as fast as I could, crashing through the underbrush, the whispers fading into the distance. It took me hours to find the trail again and make my way back to civilization, but the sense of dread and the disturbing whispers haunted me for weeks. Fifth story, The Deserted Campground by Lisa Turner. For my annual solo camping trip, I chose a remote campground in the high desert of Nevada, far from the beaten path and any civilization. The vast, arid landscape stretched out before me, promising solitude and serenity. It was a place of stark beauty, but I soon discovered it held secrets I could never have imagined. I set up my tent at the deserted campground, surrounded by scrubby sagebrush and the haunting silence of the desert. The only company I had was the distant howl of the wind and the occasional call of a lone coyote. The sun set, casting the landscape in a surreal, blood-orange glow, and I prepared to settle in for the night. As darkness fell, I heard a distant rumble, almost like thunder. But the sky was clear, and I knew there was no storm approaching. The sound grew louder, and I realized it was the unmistakable roar of engines. The noise echoed through the desert, and my heart sank as I saw the headlights of several vehicles approaching the campground. A group of people arrived, unloading their gear and setting up camp nearby. At first, I thought it was a group of fellow campers, and I greeted them with a friendly nod. But as I watched them, an uneasiness settled in my gut. Their behavior was odd, to say the least. They didn't speak to each other or acknowledge my presence. They moved with a purpose, their faces obscured by hoods and masks. It was as if they were enacting a ritual of some kind, but the details were shrouded in mystery. The night wore on, and the group's activities became increasingly disturbing. They began to chant in a language I couldn't identify, and a sense of foreboding washed over me. The desert air seemed to grow colder, and the campfire they had lit cast eerie, dancing shadows on the barren landscape. I contemplated packing up and leaving, but a primal fear kept me frozen in place. The chanting intensified, and the group raised their arms toward the sky, as if summoning some unseen entity. The desert wind carried their haunting words into the night. In a moment of desperation, I grabbed my backpack and quietly retreated into the desert, away from the eerie gathering. The whispers of the desert seemed to follow me, the words indecipherable, but their malevolence palpable. I walked for hours, disoriented and shaken, before finally making my way back to civilization. I reported the strange events to the authorities, but they found no trace of the mysterious group. To this day, the memory of that eerie desert campground and the chilling whispers of the night haunt my dreams, leaving me with a profound sense of unease and an inexplicable fear of the desert's hidden secrets. 6th story, The Rustling Leaves by Jason Harrison. On a warm summer's day, I decided to embark on a solo backpacking trip deep in the heart of Colorado's Rocky Mountains. The destination was a remote and lesser-known trail, promising seclusion and a deep connection with nature. Little did I know that this adventure would take a sinister turn and push me to the brink of terror. The hike was serene and picturesque, with towering pine trees, glistening streams, and vibrant wildflowers. As I ventured deeper into the wilderness, I couldn't help but feel a sense of isolation and vulnerability, surrounded by the towering mountains and the ever-present whisper of the wind through the leaves. I set up camp by a crystal-clear mountain lake as the sun began its descent, casting an orange and pink glow over the landscape. The tranquility of the place was undeniable, but as the evening wore on, I became acutely aware of an unsettling presence. It started as a subtle rustling of leaves, almost imperceptible, and I dismissed it as the work of the wind. But the rustling continued, growing more pronounced and more frequent. It was as though something was moving through the woods, just beyond my line of sight. The wind had died down, and the forest had fallen into a hushed silence, broken only by the unnerving rustling. I strained to listen, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever was causing it. The rustling seemed to be circling my campsite, and a chill ran down my spine as I realized that it was getting closer. Fear gripped me as I considered that it could be a person, someone lurking in the woods, watching me. I reached for my camping knife and stayed quiet, my senses on high alert. The rustling continued, growing louder and more aggressive, and I could no longer deny that there was something unnatural about it. It sounded as though the leaves were whispering, as though they were speaking to each other in a language I couldn't understand. The words, or whatever they were, seemed to echo with malevolence. As the night deepened, the rustling became a cacophony, as though the entire forest was in on the eerie conversation. My heart pounded in my chest, and I couldn't take it any longer. I grabbed my backpack and retreated into the darkness, guided only by the pale light of the moon. The rustling seemed to pursue me, growing closer and more intense. I stumbled through the woods, my mind consumed with terror. It wasn't until I reached a nearby trailhead that the sound finally began to fade. I reported the incident to the park rangers, but they found no evidence of any person or animal responsible for the bizarre rustling. To this day, I can't explain the unnatural phenomenon I encountered in the heart of the Rocky Mountains, and the whispers of the leaves continue to haunt my nightmares. 7th story, The Abandoned Cabin by Mark Davis. In the remote backcountry of Montana, I found myself drawn to an old, decaying cabin deep in the woods. I had heard rumors of its existence, an abandoned structure shrouded in mystery and unsettling stories. My curiosity got the best of me, and I decided to spend a night inside, hoping to uncover the truth behind the unsettling tales. The cabin was a dilapidated relic of the past, its windows boarded up, and the roof sagging under the weight of years. As I approached, the air grew heavy, and the silence of the woods seemed to intensify. It was as if the very forest itself was holding its breath. I cautiously entered the cabin, my flashlight cutting through the gloom. The interior was in shambles, with rotting furniture and peeling wallpaper. But it was the walls that held the most disturbing secret. They were covered in crude, unsettling drawings, twisted figures and nightmarish scenes that sent a shiver down my spine. As night fell, I settled down in one of the cabin's corners, determined to unravel the mysteries that surrounded this forsaken place. The wind outside began to howl, and the sound of creaking timbers only added to the eerie atmosphere. I felt as though I was not alone, that the cabin held a malevolent presence. Just as I was about to give up on my investigation, I heard it, a soft, haunting whisper that seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves. The words were faint and indecipherable, like the sibilant murmurings of a tormented soul. The whispers grew louder, surrounding me from all sides, and the drawings on the walls seemed to come to life, their grotesque figures twisting and writhing. Panic took hold, and I realized that I was not alone in the cabin. The malevolent force that had drawn me there was now manifesting itself in the whispers and the unsettling drawings. Terrified, I fled from the cabin, running through the dark woods, guided only by the feeble light of my flashlight. The whispers seemed to follow me, their words now filled with anger and malevolence, echoing through the night. I reached my car, parked a distance from the cabin, and sped away from the cursed place. To this day, I can't explain the sinister presence I encountered in that abandoned cabin, or the unsettling whispers that continue to haunt my memories, reminding me of the malevolent force that lurks in the heart of the Montana wilderness. 8th story, The Vanishing Campsite by Laura Bennett. I decided to go camping alone in the remote wilderness of Oregon, seeking solitude and a break from the noise of everyday life. I found a secluded campsite nestled deep within the dense forest, far from any established trails or roads. The serene surroundings promised a peaceful escape, but the events that unfolded that night were far from peaceful. As I set up my camp, the forest was shrouded in an unsettling silence, broken only by the occasional rustling of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. Night descended quickly, and I found myself sitting by the campfire, lost in thought, gazing at the dancing flames. It was when I heard the faint sound of whispering in the distance that my tranquility began to erode. The whispers were barely audible at first, like the distant conversations of hikers, but as they grew closer, I realized they were anything but ordinary. The voices were disembodied, the words distorted and twisted, like a sinister incantation. They seemed to be coming from all directions at once, and an overwhelming sense of unease washed over me. The whispers felt malevolent, as if they were summoning some dark presence from the depths of the forest. I couldn't pinpoint the source of the whispers, and the very ground beneath me seemed to hum with an eerie energy. Fear welled up inside me, and I knew I had to leave the campsite. I extinguished the campfire and packed my gear as quickly as I could. As I fled into the darkness of the forest, the whispers followed me, growing louder and more aggressive. The trees themselves seemed to twist and writhe with an otherworldly presence, and the air was thick with an oppressive energy. I ran for hours, not daring to look back, until I reached a remote ranger station, where I sought refuge for the night. The whispers eventually faded, but the memory of that night still haunts me, a reminder that there are places in the wilderness where something ancient and malevolent dwells. Ninth story, The Phantom Hiker by Daniel Reed. In the rugged wilderness of Colorado, I embarked on a solo hiking trip in the San Juan Mountains. The trails were known for their breathtaking beauty, but they were also notorious for a chilling legend that had been passed down through generations, a tale of the Phantom Hiker. The Phantom Hiker was said to be the ghost of a lost and desperate traveler who had died in the mountains, forever wandering the trails in search of a way home. Skeptical but intrigued, I decided to see if the legends had any basis in reality. As I hiked through the dense forest, the silence was broken only by the sound of my footsteps on the trail. The towering trees cast long shadows, and the atmosphere felt charged with an otherworldly energy. It was late afternoon when I first heard it, the faint, echoing sound of footsteps behind me. I turned, expecting to see another hiker, but to my shock, there was no one there. The footsteps continued, their rhythm steady and relentless, like an invisible companion trailing me through the woods. The unease I felt was undeniable. As I quickened my pace, the footsteps quickened as well, growing closer and more pronounced. I began to hear the faintest whispers, almost imperceptible, as though the Phantom Hiker was trying to communicate with me. The words were indistinct, but their tone was filled with sorrow and desperation. I reached a clearing, and as I looked back, the Phantom Hiker materialized before my eyes, a ghostly figure in tattered clothing, its face obscured. The entity's voice grew louder, the words now haunting and filled with longing. It beckoned me to follow, and I couldn't resist. I followed the Phantom Hiker into the woods, the air thick with a supernatural chill. The forest seemed to come alive with a strange, ethereal energy, and the whispers surrounded me from all directions. I continued to follow the figure deeper into the mountains, lost in the eerie allure of the Phantom Hiker. It wasn't until I reached the edge of a precipice that I realized the danger I was in. The Phantom Hiker stood at the edge, looking out into the abyss, and I realized it was trying to lead me over the edge. Panic surged through me, and I turned and fled, backtracking to the safety of the trail. The whispers faded as I retreated, and I made my way back to civilization, shaken by the encounter with the Phantom Hiker. To this day, I can't explain the eerie presence I encountered in the San Juan Mountains, or the unsettling whispers that linger in my memory. 10th story, The Haunted Fire Lookout by Sarah Reynolds. I had always been drawn to the idea of staying in a fire lookout tower, perched high in the Montana wilderness, offering panoramic views of the surrounding forest. One summer, I booked a stay in an isolated fire lookout with the intention of enjoying the solitude and stunning vistas. Little did I know that I would come face to face with a chilling and inexplicable experience. The lookout tower was perched atop a steep, rocky hill, accessible only by a winding dirt road that led deep into the woods. The structure was weather-worn, and the wooden floor creaked with every step. Despite its age, the views were breathtaking, and I was determined to savor the solitude. The first night passed peacefully as I watched the stars from the tower's balcony, the only sounds being the gentle rustling of leaves in the night breeze. But as I settled into my sleeping bag, I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping, as if someone were knocking on the wooden walls of the lookout. I tried to dismiss it as the work of a curious animal, but the tapping grew louder and more persistent. It was as though someone, or something, was trying to communicate. Fear began to settle in as the tapping took on a deliberate pattern, almost like Morse code. I ventured outside, scanning the forest below, but there was no sign of any intruders. The tapping continued, growing more insistent, and the night air seemed to pulse with an eerie energy. I couldn't ignore the feeling that I was not alone. As I returned to the lookout, the tapping reached a fever pitch, and the walls seemed to vibrate with each impact. I couldn't take it any longer and decided to retreat further into the forest, seeking refuge from the unsettling noise. I walked for hours, guided only by the moonlight, and the tapping gradually faded into the distance. I eventually reached a nearby ranger station, where I spent the night. When I returned to the fire lookout the next day, the tapping was gone, and the tower stood silent and deserted. I reported the incident to the authorities, but no explanation could be found for the bizarre tapping. To this day, I can't explain the chilling experience in the Montana wilderness, or the unsettling presence that seemed to inhabit the fire lookout, leaving me with an enduring sense of unease. Thank you for watching whole video. Check this video you see on the screen, it's one of my favorite. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and smash that like, to support my free and daily content for you. If you enjoyed this video, drop a comment and tell me what story got you chills.